Hey everyone, Dr. Jim here to talk to you today about two related topics. Knowing your children deeply, and then practical things you can do when you feel overwhelmed by your kids and you just need to know more. One of the blessings in disguise about this whole quarantine is that we're getting to know our children in new and different ways. Personally, I'm finding out just how terrible of a teacher I am and how it's embarrassing how much seventh grade math I've forgotten how to do. Hopefully you're learning a lot about your kids during this time as well. And it's probably also raising some questions that maybe you haven't thought about before. So I wanted to share with you today a little tradition I have in my home and pass it on to you. A few times a year, my wife and I will sit down and we'll go through each one of our children. I've got 5 boys, and sort of holistically assess how we think they're doing in just mind, body, and spirit. So with 5 boys, it's easy for them to fall through the cracks, and it's hard to keep tabs on all of them. Not just in their behavior, but emotionally and psychologically and academically, it's a lot. And so we have to be proactive about it. In most families, there's 1 or 2 kids who end up sucking most of the attention and most of the energy that parents have just by their temperament or their needs or their nature. And at the same time, there's kids who kind of fly under the radar. Their behaviors may be a little bit quieter. They're not as assertive. And balancing those two things is extremely, it can be extremely hard. And when the quiet kids finally assert themselves, I know in my own family, I'm just like, who are you? What's your name? I don't even know who you are. How did you get into my house? And then with the kids that are really loud, I just kind of want to smack them. Parenting is like a game of whack-a-mole, and right when one kid's needs are taken care of, another kid starts freaking out and is harder to manage. And so to prevent this, we've got to be proactive about what's going on in the hearts and minds of our kids before they blow up into a big problem. And we forget what's going on and we forget who they are. And today I want to share the process that my wife and I go through to discern where our kids are at. Now, to preamble, the process I'm going to talk about is a little bit more formalized than what actually happens in real life. We don't sit there with clipboards and go through every aspect of our children and rate them. No, it usually happens at 11 o'clock at night around a fire, drinking a glass of scotch. So just don't want you to get the wrong impression. We want to be proactive and organized. We also want to enjoy it and have it be an organic process. So let's dive in. Contrary to the old-fashioned wisdom about children, they're just as psychologically complex, if not more, than adults. They have their own unique needs. And one of the things that I find hard about parenting, a really hard thing for me to let go of, is that they have their own unique challenges that to some degree they have to carry and work through on their own. I think back to my own childhood and I think just how hard it was for me to make friends and just how hard it was for me to get through a day at school. And there was only so much my parents could do apart from loving me and helping me with some resources. But I had to eventually figure it out on my own. And sitting back and watching that as a parent is extremely hard. Parenting is a lot more like being a gardener than it is about being an engineer. We nurture our children, we tend to our children. We cannot make our children into anything. They're going to grow into who they're going to grow into, and we just assist with that process. A lot of parents, myself included, really struggle to accept that. We kind of live vicariously through our children. Their success, their happiness reflects our success and our happiness. If they're not happy and successful, then we are not happy and successful. And that's a normal and natural way to feel. It's also maybe not the healthiest way that we can relate to our children. Instead, it should be all about helping our children discover who they are, and then us nurturing that growth, helping them discover it, and help them become the best version of themselves, the best person that they become. Accepting that they need space to grow while still tending to their needs, being a hands-on parent, is it's a really tricky balance. Knowing your children in a deep way just might be the most important thing you can do in order to strike this balance. The way you view your child is really, really important. Believe it or not, you are the most important thing in your child's life. Their health, their well-being, their resources, their sense of self-esteem, and it all comes from you. And so because of that, your children, as aloof as they might seem, are very aware of your own emotional state, what you think of your children, what you believe about your children. They soak all of that in. If it takes 5 years to get a PhD and you have a 5-year-old, you've got a child who's got a PhD in you. And this is especially true of your beliefs about your child. So how you understand your child's struggles and strengths is extremely predictive of how they're going to turn out in life. So for example, if you've got a kid who's got ADHD and struggles in school, well, if you think of that kid as being, lazy, crazy, or stupid, that kid's going to internalize the message that he is lazy, crazy, and stupid, even if you've never said a word about it to them. They pick it up, they soak it in. Now, what's important to know here is that doesn't mean you have to be perfect or you're going to destroy your kids. That's not how that works. Let's face it. Sometimes kids are lazy, they definitely act crazy, and they a lot of times will do stuff that is stupid. So having some of those thoughts go through your mind isn't necessarily the end of the world. The point is, if you deeply understand your kid, you really know their hearts and their minds, then you're going to understand where these behaviors come from, and you're going to be a lot more empowered to know what to do about it. So let me give you a list of things for you to consider about your children, each of them from time to time. First, frequently try and take your child's emotional temperature. Kids communicate through their behaviors a lot more than they do through the words. Even a mature teen can't be like, "Mom, Dad, you may have observed that I've been a little edgy lately. Well, I've just wanted you to know that I've been enduring a lot of stress at school, and I'm anxious about my future, and I also am striving for independence, but I'm all too aware of my dependence on you, and I'm experiencing a little bit of resentment about it." No, that's not going to happen. Kids can't do that. Kids have no idea what's going on in their mind most of the time. That's why it's really important for us as parents to be attentive to that, to pay attention to that. I'll give you an example of when I was a kid. One day, my mom called me into the kitchen and said, just like this, "Hey, Jim, please take out the trash." And I just had a total emotional meltdown. I was just like, "What is this? What's going on? This is horrible. I'm moving out. You just boss me around and tell me what to do." I'm 15 at the time. It's just totally over the top. This goes on for hours. And then finally I calmed down a little bit. My dad mistakenly tells me to write an apology letter to my mom. And I just use that as an excuse to rant on in written form all of my anger about my situation. I said, like, "Children die in orphanages because of the lack of love. Well, my situation is much worse than theirs." I just went on and on and on. Well, the next day I was just as confused about my blow up as anybody else was. I had no idea why I did what I did. I didn't have any insight. Well, that's true of our children and so much of their behavior. Learning yourself takes time. It takes time to be able to reflect on yourself. And certainly that doesn't come naturally for a lot of us adults, let alone our children. And so doing some thinking about that, kind of reading their behaviors, is extremely helpful as a parent. What is your child saying to you through their behavior? When their behavior is kind of big and intense, it's kind of like they just are vomiting all over you. And most of the time when people vomit on other people, it's disgusting and we just want to wipe it off and get rid of it. Well, in the case of a child, our job is literally just to contain it. Our child vomits their behavior on us and make us feel whatever it is that we feel. And our job is to hold on to it and basically communicate through our own behavior that, even if it's gross, we can contain it, that we've got it, that we understand them. And we can't do this unless we really take time to understand our kids. So kids are acting through their behavior. So one of the tools that you can use is think about how your child's behavior makes you feel. So for example, if your kid's having a hard time in school, getting bad grades, maybe not doing a lot of work, how do you feel? Well, you're probably feeling angry and helpless. And guess what? That's probably exactly how your child feels as well. And recognizing this all of a sudden helps you go from being powerless and unable to do anything to finally having some insight and being able to have a more authentic conversation with your kid. The next thing is to think about your child's relationships. How are things going in your own relationship with your child? And really give some thought to what's going on with your child and what does your child specifically need from you? What is your child's love language? The 5 love language books, they're all great. Even if you just read chapter 1 and take a quiz at the end, it's a useful exercise for sure. Ask your child what they would like to do with you. You know, their first response might be, hey, I want a Nintendo Switch. That would really make me feel loved. But if you really sit down and talk it through with them, they're going to be honest with you and share things that they really need. So, for example, during the whole quarantine, I've had a lot more chances to spend time with my kids above what I'm normally able to do. We're spending time outside building forts. We're playing board games. We're making dinners together. We're doing all kinds of things. And last week I noticed that one of my kids, Matthew, was a little bit more disconnected from me than normal. So I sat down with him one day and I said, hey buddy, you know, what's going on? What do you want to do? And in my head, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've just spent hours and hours and hours doing things with you guys. Like, what else could you possibly mean? Well, instead of saying that, I just asked him. I asked him what he'd like to do. And he said, Dad, I just want to watch a movie and eat cookie dough. And that's simple enough. That's exactly what we did. We rented a movie that we wouldn't normally watch as a family. We got Chronicles of Riddick, and we ate cookie dough together. The cookie dough was delicious. Chronicles of Riddick, maybe not so much. But the point is, it filled my son's little love bucket, and he felt really connected and taken care of. And just because, you know, I asked him what would help, what would he like. Another important point is, honestly, sitting down and watching a movie wouldn't be my first choice. I like being active. I like doing stuff. Let's go for a hike. Let's build something. Well, what he wanted is to sit and watch a movie. And an important principle in life that will take you far is to love other people how they want to be loved. Love your children how they want to be taken care of and loved. And so I stepped outside myself and watched a ridiculous movie and made my son feel really taken care of and really good. So continuing on here, also thinking about your child's friendships. Children's friendships oftentimes have just as much drama as any adult relationship. And that includes boys. As a father of 5 boys, I want to dispel the rumor that girls are more dramatic than boys. Just come live in my house for a week and you'll see a much different story. And it's not to make fun of the drama. These things actually matter, their relationships, the drama they're experiencing. It's very important to them. It's their world. And so even if as an adult we're looking at it, it feels like a soap opera, being able to step into that world and talk with them about it, help them think things through with their friends, help them develop their friendships is really good. If you can teach good friendship skills from an early age, I can't even tell you how far that's going to go, right? Not just in their friends, but even their career and especially their marriage. But we have to pay attention to it. You've got to have kind of your finger on the pulse. It doesn't mean that you tell your kids what to do, but being a sounding board that helps them think through. The next big area is giving some thought to your child's current state of identity. Who your child becomes is this combination of the values and traits they download from you, kind of subconsciously, but it's also involves their own experiences and their own goals. Childhood is all about figuring out who you are, especially adolescence. Yeah, and we do it by discovering things that we're good at, how we fit into relationships, and that kind of thing. For a kid who's struggling in school, though, this can be a lot harder. So think of it like this. A lot of us, most of us, have probably had a job at some point that we just didn't really like, that we didn't feel like we were very good at. Well, for a lot of kids, that's what going to school really feels like. Even if you know that you're kind of smart, it's not a natural fit. School, I think, is made for probably 60% of all brains, and that 40% leaves a lot of kids who are at jobs that they don't feel like they're particularly good at. But what makes it different is, for the kid, they don't know any different. They've always gone to school, and it's easy to start internalizing this notion, like, I guess this is how school is. This is going to be my life. This is going to be the rest of my life. Always feeling kind of mediocre and unfulfilled and unpassionate about things. So it's really important to kind of have your finger on that pulse a little bit. What is your child's school experience like? It's just as important as your own experience in work, if not more. That doesn't mean that we can always fix the problem. We're not going to revolutionize the school system anytime soon here. But what we can do is help give thought to what our child's strengths are and really kind of go in that direction. Life is more about focusing on our strengths and ignoring our weaknesses than it is about just fixing our problems and fixing our weaknesses. I tell people all the time that I probably have a sixth grade math level, and yet people call me doctor all the time. It's because I went in the direction of my strengths and did my best to avoid my weaknesses. Well, a lot of times kids who are going through school and are struggling, they don't necessarily know what their strengths are. And so helping them identify them, articulate them, develop them, and it doesn't necessarily mean getting them into a million different activities, just fostering their interests, and then more importantly, taking part in their interests. My oldest son is totally obsessed with architecture, and one way for me to gel with him and also help kind of nurture his strengths is to kind of join with him in that interest. So we're designing this fort outside to kind of look like a modern building, and giving him as much leadership in the design as possible, to help nurture that strength. And they're not talking about architecture a whole lot at school, so it's probably true for lots of kids, if not most kids. Being diligent about developing an awareness of their identity, pushing them in a direction, pushing without shoving them in a direction, is going to be really, really helpful for them. So let's talk for a few minutes here about what can you do if you are feeling overwhelmed and lost in your parenting. My clinical specialty is psychological testing, and so I'm going to make a shameless act of self-promotion and talk to you just about how powerful a tool it can be for families. If you feel really overwhelmed, and if you feel like you just don't understand what's going on with one of your kids, pay attention, because this really could be for you. And also, if you're not sure if testing would be helpful for you, maybe you've thought about it, maybe other people have recommended it to you. I'm a therapist before I'm a business person, and so I'd be very happy to sit down with you for an hour and just talk it through with you and see what would be helpful. I am lucky enough to have plenty of business, and I don't need to sell you anything you don't need. People a lot of times get confused about what testing is all about. It's easy to think like you just diagnose and then it's just about getting accommodations for kids or whatever. A good evaluation does a lot more than just provide a diagnosis. When I test a kid, I feel like it's my job to kind of get inside their head and learn what's going on, right? Like I was saying before, it's not like a kid can just sit down and articulate their deepest, darkest secrets that are going on. No, they can't do that. They don't even know what's going on themselves. And so what testing can do is actually access, some of the underlying thoughts that are going on. It also helps discover their strengths along with their growth areas and that kind of thing. In my line of work, what we do to get at some of that is use what's called projective testing or personality testing. So if you come across that term, that's important to know. It gives you an opportunity sort of to get underneath the hood and understand what's going on, kind of understand some of the subconscious processes that are going on inside a person's mind. It's so helpful because, imagine how much more you'd be able to help your kid if you had just a sense of what your child believed about him or herself, what kind of thoughts went on inside your kid's head, how they related to other people, what their self-esteem is like, what they believed about setting goals for themselves and what responsibility means to them, all these things. I mean, it would be really powerful if you could know those things. And unfortunately, children are not always able to sit down and just tell you about it. Testing can definitely pinpoint the nature of whatever struggle's going on. As a parent, you could drop thousands and thousands of dollars on different education and therapies and opportunities or whatever. But if your kid's kind of having a hard time and they don't have a great sense of identity and you don't know what's going on, it's a lot like throwing darts. Well, with testing, and they're very expensive darts, with testing, it's like walking up to the dartboard and taking the dart and putting it right in the bullseye. It gives you a sense that you really walk away knowing what is going on with your child in all the different areas that we would look at, their personality, their cognitive abilities, and all these different things. It's also really useful in figuring out if you just have a spirited boy who's pretty normal, or you have a spirited little boy with ADHD. This is really important because if your kid has ADHD or any other diagnosis for that matter, it really does mean that there's something different about the way that their brain is wired. Not necessarily bad, but still nonetheless different. And we need to parent our children based on what our children need and who our children are. And so the way that you parent a child who has ADHD, whose brain is wired a little bit differently, is going to be a little bit different from how you parent a spirited little boy who just needs to grow up a little bit. It's also true for, you can think about a teenager. Do I have a kind of just a moody, normal teenager, or do I have a depressed teen who probably needs extra help? And this is a particularly important one, especially in this day and age with how high the suicide rate is. Parents of kids who commit suicide are often just totally taken by surprise and are floored because they didn't know that their teen needed extra help. And then, of course, there's school. Like I was saying, school's made for 60% of all brains. Maybe some really good schools can accommodate 70 or 80%. But the problem is it affects, school's made for 60% of all kids. It affects 100% of kids. School is it's a big deal. Even if you're not a parent who stresses academic rigor and that kind of thing, it has a huge impact, just like your work life might have a huge impact on you. So if a kid is struggling in school, understanding why that is extremely important. So a good evaluation is going to look at three different areas. As a parent, you should be thinking about kind of these three different areas as well. The first one is called the self system. So this is in this system, this heuristic, so to speak, it's you can think of it as the gateway to all learning. If the self system isn't activated, then you're not going to learn a darn thing. You're not going to engage in school at all. For a student to engage in the learning process, or for an adult, or for anybody for that matter, they have to be able to answer yes to these three questions. Is this task important? Can I succeed at this? And does this task make me feel good? Well, here's the thing. If you have a kid who's in the 40%, they're going to be really questioning those three questions. I remember thinking a million times going throughout my own schooling, doing stuff I wasn't naturally good at and didn't seem to have a point, asking, is this even important? What's the point of doing this? On top of that, I definitely didn't feel like I could succeed. And for a lot of kids, if this is the case for them, that school's harder, school doesn't make them feel good. So we avoid things that don't make us feel good. And then when we avoid things like school, we fall behind, and then it makes us feel even worse, and it kind of creates this snowball effect. Not only do we end up really, really struggling in school, it's also really easy to just lose your whole sense of where a kid's kind of sense of personal identity is going, what direction it's heading in. You can also think of it like this. For some kids, there's just bigger things going on in their life. If a kid is a product of a divorce, or a kid has something really important going on with their friends, or if they struggle with any kind of anxiety or depression, it's kind of like imagine going to work and trying to get through your day and having a really terrible toothache. It's really impossible to concentrate. It's really impossible to be motivated if you're worried about something else. And so as a parent, figuring out what that other thing you're worried about is really important. The next system is the metacognitive system. And this is all about executive functioning. Executive functioning is the boss of your brain. So you can think about all the important skills our brain does: paying attention, setting goals for ourselves, having self-awareness, and being organized. The list goes on and on and on. There's probably a list of 20 things or so that affect this. So if you have a boss, even if you're really, even if a company is really good, but the boss is kind of immature, that company is really going to struggle. And that's the case for a lot of kids in school. So this executive functioning is an important thing to assess. In more extreme cases, that would be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. But there's a whole range, a whole spectrum that it could affect. And if kids have weaknesses in their executive functioning, they're going to need more explicit teaching and support in order to succeed in those areas. It's also important because executive functioning is kind of like common sense. And in some children, this common sense skill sort of unfolds naturally. You just do it. And other people need to be taught more directly. And so good testing definitely takes a good look at what's going on with a kid's executive functioning, their metacognitive system. The last section, the last thing to think about is a kid's cognitive system. This is where most classroom time is spent. We take in information, we process this information, and then we express our understanding of this information in the form of assignments or projects or tests or what have you. We learn something, we hopefully store it away for later use, and that kind of thing. The way a student processes this information is really, really important. How they learn, what their learning style is, what their strengths and weaknesses are, it's extremely important. A lot of times kids with a learning disability or ADHD have deficits in all three of these systems that I'm talking about: their self system, their metacognitive system, and their cognitive system. So, for example, they might be a slower processor, and so their cognitive system is kind of bogged down. And if you have ADHD, you can't pay that great attention, and so your metacognitive system isn't operating as efficiently as it could. Well, if those two things are going on, of course it's going to impact the self system. School's not going to feel very good. And so, most evaluations actually only focus in the metacognitive and cognitive system. A good evaluation is going to take into account all three of those things. How the executive functioning, cognitive abilities, academic abilities like reading, writing, and math, and then really importantly, the psychological nature of everything that's going on with the kid too. So yeah, testing is all about diagnosing. It's about figuring out sort of what label to put on a kid, but that's really only the tip of the iceberg. Labeling is important, and I'll tell you why. Everyone gets a label, especially if someone is struggling. That label at school might be that kid's lazy, crazy, stupid, not living up to their potential, whatever. Well, if your child has ADHD or something else that's going on, the ADHD label is better than the lazy, crazy, stupid label. Almost every parent I talk to says, but what if it's a crutch? What if it's just a crutch? I don't want my kid to use it as a crutch. Well, I've got two thoughts about that. One is that having a diagnosis does not decrease your kid's responsibility for their life. We get one life. We got to take ownership of your life. And I believe we've got to parent that into our kids. We've got to teach that into our kids. We're not raising kids. We're raising adults. We want to raise people to be, successful and independent. And at the same time, if you have a broken leg, you need a crutch. If a kid has ADHD and can't take tests very effectively or something like that, they're gonna need a crutch. They're gonna need accommodations, things to help them reach their full potential. Testing also helps kind of create a plan for any kind of therapy, any kind of education, accommodations for school. Like I said, it's walking up to that dartboard and putting the dart right in the middle. It identifies exactly what needs to be done. And then lastly, it gives you peace of mind. Deeply understanding your child will make every parent just feel better, even if it doesn't provide all the answers on what you do. Just knowing your child is 90% of the battle, because that's going to guide all of your parenting decisions. When you understand your child, you have so much more empathy and how to help them out. And so, yeah, give this little routine I was talking about some thought, and think about different ways that you can really get to know your child on a deeper level, and it's going to pay big dividends for you guys.